So every time I have a discussion, either with my clients or any other person that I'm talking to, one of the first things that they actually ask me is, what should I actually put in my will? What kind of provisions must I include here to make sure that my beneficiaries are actually not going to suffer? I always stop them each time they ask me this question and say, that's not the first question you should ask me. The first thing that we need to do is to actually determine whether or not you have got sufficient assets and you've got sufficient tools to ensure that your beneficiaries actually will be taken care of should you pass away. So the first thing that we need to do before we can actually go to whether or not you should draft the will and what you should put in the will is to go through what we call an estate planning session. Now, why is an estate planning session important and what does this session actually cover? We'll talk about this just now, but before we do so, let me introduce myself, more especially for people who are here for the first time. My name is Yolanda Mnyengeza and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. So why do I redirect a lot of people and say to them, before you even talk about drafting a will, let's do an estate planning session? Now, the reason is simple. In the estate planning session, we get the opportunity to assess your current financial circumstances, the assets that you have, and probably what you're leaving behind. And then after that, we actually put up a plan to make sure that whatever it is that you're leaving behind is actually going to be sufficient to cover and provide for your beneficiaries should you pass away. And then we draft the will. So what do we talk about in this session? The first thing we need to talk about or consider is, what assets do you have? What's the value of your current assets? Now, the reason why we're doing this is because we're trying to figure out literally the prospective value of your estate and probably what your administration costs could actually be. So we want to see what your estate looks like and get an understanding before we actually move on to the plan. And also, we want to be sure that the assets that you think you have are actually assets. Because a lot of people tend to make the mistake that they think that they have an asset, but in actual fact they don't. They actually have a debt. What do I mean by this? A lot of people that have mortgages think that they actually have an asset. That property that they have is actually their asset. In actual fact, it's a debt. And so those things we then decipher in this discussion so that they are clear in your mind and you get to understand them clearly. And now the second thing we talk about in this estate planning session is, what are your debts? What are they looking like? Things like your mortgage. Where is it at? And do you think that the people you're leaving behind can continue to pay for that mortgage and take it over when you pass away? So if not, we have to figure out a plan on how to cover that debt. If you've got other debts as well, what are they? Put them on the table so that we can see them and actually create a plan for them so that when you pass away, those debts can be covered. Because here's the thing, when you die, those debts don't die, they continue to exist and they need to be settled. And what is going to settle them? It is the estate that you're leaving behind. So we need to put a proper plan in place so that they can be covered. Third thing that we cover in the estate planning session is, what could be the prospective taxes that could apply to your estate? Because even in death, in South Africa, you pay for your taxes. There's things like capital gains tax. There's things like estate duty tax, one of the most expensive taxes an estate can actually pay. So we want to have a look at those and probably how to plan for those things. Now, once we've actually talked about these three things that I've talked about, we sit down with you and we create a plan. How do we cover these debts should you pass away? Do you have some liquidity? How do you create liquidity if you don't have it? What is liquidity? It's a bit of cash so that you can cover the costs of the administration, so you can cover the debts that are there, etc., etc. So liquidity is very important because here's the thing, if you don't have money to cover those debts, we're probably going to have to sell something in order to cover them, because they need to be covered, and also the administration costs need to be paid. So this is why an estate planning session is important. Once you've figured out all of these things, you can then move on to actually draft your will. That is how we do it at our office, because we want to make sure that your will aligns and speaks to, number one, the assets that you have. This will of yours can create sufficient provision for the people that you're leaving behind, more especially if you're leaving children behind, minor children. So we want to make sure that this will of yours is going to be watertight and it's going to be beneficial, more than just a template that we provide to you. So what do I suggest for you? Next time you want to draft a will, sit down with someone first and actually go through the session and talk to them about the things you have, and let them guide you and prepare a plan for you. We've come to the end of the session. We hope you did get something that will be useful to you. My name is Yolanda Mnyengeza, and I'm an attorney and a director at Mnyengeza Attorneys. We'll see you next time when we talk about something that could be useful to you.